Hello, reading friend, and thanks for joining me for another book chat. Today, let's spend some time with The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I'm not sure that this cover is showing up that well. It is a black background with gold letters on the cover, and it's not showing up in this electronic format too well. But The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue was originally published in 2020, and I listened to a MacMillan audio edition from 2020, narrated by Julia Whelan. So there we go, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This is the first of the V.E. Schwab novels that I've read, but it will not be the last. I read up on this author, and apparently her adult novels she publishes under the name V.E. Schwab, and then her YA, her young adult works, she publishes under Victoria Schwab. So anything with V.E. Schwab, I guess, is on the adult side. But yeah, so I decided to read this. This book came across my reading path really quite by accident, through sort of a weird way. It wound up in my audio library, and then I was gonna return it, and then I looked at the description, and the description just really intrigued me, so I decided to not only keep it, but go ahead and read it. And it was quite an interesting read, so I am really glad that I went ahead and made that decision, because I did enjoy this a lot. So what it's about, so spoiler disclaimer, so this book's got several major plot twists. So I do want to be very careful to not give away anything in this brief sort of book chat that might detract from a first-time reader's experience with The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. So I'll be careful about that. But just in general, what this book's about, as the book opens, it's in the early 1700s. I believe it's 1713 or 1714. And Addie LaRue is a young woman who lives in a small village in France in this year, early 1700s. And she is not married. She is a sort of a free spirit in a way. Her father is a wood carver, and sort of the highlight of her life has been going with him into a neighboring town when he goes to a market there, I guess once a year. At a certain stage of her life, she was allowed to go with him, and then she reached a point where her parents decided she was really too old to go, and so it was time for her to get married. And so they start finding her a match to get married, because this is really the life in this village. This is what people do. She, however, doesn't want this type of life, and so she's desperate to avoid it at all costs. So Addie's got her parents, like I mentioned. She also has a sister who is already married. So her parents just seem like they want her to get married and get settled. This is their expectation for her. This is not what she wants for herself. She has a friend, sort of an eccentric woman who lives not far away, by the name Estelle. And Estelle is a very eccentric woman who lives alone in sort of this I guess shack. She practices kind of like the old ways, right? She does herbal medicine and things like this. And then she also she prays to the pagan gods still. She warns Addie, don't ever pray to the gods that answer you at night. I think's how the quote goes. Let me see. Never pray to the gods that answer after dark. Is how the quote goes. Addie, however, as her marriage day looms, she finds herself in sort of quite a bit of desperation, and she does pray to the gods that answer after dark, and she asks for something fairly simple and pretty common. I think she doesn't want to belong to anybody, because in this time frame, when a woman gets married, she kind of belongs to her husband, and she kind of loses a lot of her autonomy, what autonomy she might otherwise have at this era, and I'll talk more about that here in a bit. But so she at the sort of a last desperate attempt, she prays to the gods to, like, she doesn't want to belong to anybody. She wants freedom, and this is what she asks for. Well, and she's also kind of a little artist herself. She draws and things in a notebook, and one thing that she recurringly draws is this really handsome man. It's kind of like her dream man, right, I guess. Well, in the answer to her prayer, this dream man of hers that she created in her sketchbook appears to her to answer her prayer, right? Of course, she has to give up her soul in exchange. So at the end of the time, whenever she decides she gets tired of this life, she will have to go to him and say, I surrender, I give up, and then he'll take her soul. But in the meantime, she won't belong to anybody. She'll have total freedom, and she won't die. So she's basically becomes immortal. So let's just think for a minute about what it would mean to not belong to anybody and be totally free. That sounds like, on the surface, that sounds like something we all kind of want. But however, she learns fairly quickly that what this means is if you don't belong to anybody and you're totally free, that means no one knows you. So she can meet people, they will forget her. If as soon as she's out of sight, they will forget she was ever even there. She can't say her own name. She learns right away her own parents don't recognize her. Her sister doesn't recognize her. People will approach her like a stranger, and then 1 minute they'll kind of like turn their back on her, and then turn back to her, and then like, who are you? And so she can't own anything. She can't make any kind of mark in the world at all. She can't even say her own name, because by saying your name, it's binding you to somebody. It's tying you to somebody. And if you have freedom, you can't own anything. You can't own any property. You can't own a house because that ties you down, right? So this kind of freedom, it's sort of this kind of bargain that it winds up being way more than she anticipated. Yeah, so one thing about this, there's a kind of a note I jotted down. If a tree falls in the forest, does anybody hear it? That saying? So if no one is aware of your existence, then do you really exist? She questions this, because no one knows her anymore. So the story ends up winding through centuries, actually. About 300 years we go through with her in different sort of ways. And she starts out in this little village. The first thing she's got to do is figure out how to get out of the village, right? She can't even read yet because women didn't get taught to read as often as males did in this era. So she just barely knew some letters. She didn't know how to read even. But she quickly sort of takes to learning and trying to adapt to her new life. It's very difficult, especially at first. She can't even get food. Really, she needs to learn how to steal, right? Because she can't own anything. So she goes through many, many years this way, sort of on her own, and she has this recurring presence of this man, the person she prayed to. She calls him the Darkness, and he appears to her periodically, especially on the anniversary of their bargain. He will appear to her. And their relationship actually becomes fairly complex. I don't want to give away. There's a lot that happens. There's other characters that enter the book, and then, like I said, there's a couple of pretty big plot twists that I definitely don't want to give away here up front. All on this sort of journey that she goes on. Really, she wants just somebody to remember her, and she finds ways to do that. We'll just say that. So another thing I wrote down is a quote from the book that says, "Books are a way to live 1,000 lives." So she finds that this way she can kind of make a mark on the world, and not really a mark on the world, but she can interact with the world through books and through art. So she spends a lot of time, she gets to know lots of artists through the course of the book, and this is one way that she whispers herself into the world. There's another really cool quote, I think, in the book that says, "The thrill of whispering something into the world," she makes that sort of statement. This occurs when she has had a relationship with a man. By the way, she has relationships with people, and she can go back to the same people because they don't remember her, but if they were attracted to her the first time, then they'll be attracted to her again, right? Often. And so she ends up having this, quote unquote, semi-relationship with this guy. And one period they're discussing a potential bar and the name of this bar and the logo, and he writes it all on a napkin and everything. Well, and of course, whenever she doesn't see him again, or they sleep, and then this happens a lot of times when they sleep together, and then they wake up in the morning, the person that she's with doesn't remember who. It's like, who are you and why are you in my bed? But anyway, she then later on sees this bar, and she sees that name, and she sees that logo that they created, and she's talking about that little whisper. She had an impact on the world in that little small way, that whispering something into the world. I thought that idea was just so cool. Some other kind of cool ideas I took away from the book was wearing men's clothes. So one thing she learns early on is women can't, at this point in time in France, they can't be alone very much out in public, or else it draws attention to themselves. And one thing she doesn't want to do, especially when she's stealing for food or whatever, is draw attention to herself. And so she learns to wear men's clothes, that if she can pass as a man, she can move about more free. She can be more free because people don't pay attention to her if they think she's a man. Whereas if she's alone out in the world in women's clothes as a woman, they notice her, and then it draws their attention, and often negative attention, in several different ways. Another kind of cool thing I took away from the book was you don't realize the power of your name until it's gone. She can't say her name throughout most of the book. She can't utter it to people. People can't know her name. So she has to give these these fake names when she meets these people, because she can't say her own name through most of the book. So that's just really cool. It made me think a lot about that. And then finally, I'm kind of running out of time, but just what I have spent some time thinking about after finishing this book is, if I wanted something so bad, what would I be willing to sell my soul for? And then, think about that, and then think of what all the consequences could be. Because you could say freedom, you could say you don't want to be owned by anybody, you don't want to belong to anybody, until you actually think that all the way through, and you realize, oh, well, the end game of that is I can't have any ties at all. So, thinking through what the cost would be. There's another sort of instance in this book where someone wants to be loved and makes a similar bargain with the darkness to be loved. And what would that mean? If you wanted people to love you and you really got what you asked for, what would that look like? Probably look a bit different in real life rather than what we just think on the surface. So anyway, I think I will leave the chat at that. I did enjoy this so much. She's written several other novels which now I want to read. So I will have some more of V.E. Schwab on my reading list in the months to come. So my next chat is going to be either one of two books. It might be The Proper Study of Mankind, this collection of essays by Isaiah Berlin. It's kind of a chunker, and I'm about halfway done with it. So if I finish this one first, this will be my next chat. Otherwise, it will be this one, To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. I am listening to this audiobook. If I finish this one first, this one will be my next chat. So in any case, whatever, in my next chat, stay tuned for my next chat. And until then, take care. Bye.